Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology on YouTube. I'm Scott here in Florida. We're getting a nice, pleasant 95-degree day here today. It's supposed to cool off for the next couple of days, but summer is coming. Not happy about it.
95, seriously?
Huh?
95, seriously?
95. Right now,
Wow.
right now it's 92. It's supposed to get up to 95 by the middle of the afternoon.
Well, I'm sitting here in nice chilly Missouri with a 90% chance of snow on Tuesday.
Oh, jeez. Do we even live in the same continent?
I'm beginning to wonder. I mean, I'm smack dab in the middle of April, and they're talking about a low of like 27 degrees next week with snow. So, and my furnace kicked back on this week because it's been cold and rainy. So, yeah.
Oh my God, my air conditioner, which is new in the past year, so I'm ready for it. But it's been working. It's been working the past couple of 3 days. Okay, Bob, it's his turn today to talk about some favorite debut albums after I did last week. I just wanted to touch on that. Last week, one of my three was the Roxy Music debut, and I followed it up by writing a post on Geezerology.com a few days ago covering Roxy's entire catalog. So jump on over there if you have a chance. If you saw us last week and I got you interested in Roxy music, go check it out. Geezerology.com.
Yeah.
Bob, any opening statements?
Yeah, before we delve into my debut album list, I want to make a comment. And I read your Roxy music piece.
Okay.
And I want to give a shout out here to you for your ability to do such a great job to encapsulate in just a paragraph or two what these albums mean and their content. And you've got a great talent for doing that. And even though I don't know these albums, like, the ones you've done for the Velvet Underground and Roxy and stuff, even though I don't necessarily know these albums, I get a really good feel for what they're about from reading your capsule descriptions. And I just wanted to give a shout out that you do a really great job with that. And I encourage people to go read those.
Oh, thank you. I work hard at it, and I think about it hard when I'm writing it. So I'm glad to hear that my work is being fruitful, that I'm getting the message across. But yeah, go check it out. Yeah, Roxy was an interesting band back from 72 to 82, 11-year career basically, 11-year recording career. They reformed as a touring band a couple of times since then, but this is all about their recorded output. So go check it out, Geezerology.com. Bob, over to you, buddy.
All mine? Okay.
All
righty. So as you guys know, Scott and I have taken on our topic this time, our top three debut albums from the rock era. So I've got my three, and I'm going to start out with a metaphor that Scott can understand. I'm going to swing for the fences. We're going to do the debut album by The Doors, their self-titled debut, released January 4th, 1967. This is the album that quite literally changed my life. And when I finally encountered this, it moved me from just listening to music as something in the background or going, wow, man, that was really cool the way they did that guitar, to actually seeing music as literature, something that would impact my life. So this has a great personal meaning to me, but I also think it's important in the history of rock for its uniqueness, for the impact that it had, and for how it moved rock into poetry and literature. So some details. The album reached number 2 on the US Billboard 200. Light My Fire became a number 1 single. It is the 27th most ranked record on the all-time lists. In 2015, the Library of Congress selected the album for inclusion into its National recording registry, and those selections are based on the artistic, cultural, and historical significance of a recording. Excuse me. The Doors were unique. They were unlike anything else that was going on in music at the time. And it was an inclusion of rock poetry and literature. And it was a mixture of classical, Baroque, and jazz influences into rock music. All of the people in the Doors are extremely intelligent individuals. Morrison in particular was a great poet, a great fantastic writer. The other three members of the Doors were all accomplished musicians. I was out with my wife earlier this week, and I had Absolutely Live playing in the car. And my wife is not a rock fan, but she was listening to it, and she knows what I think about the Doors. And in the midst of that live album playing, she turned to me and said, "You know, Morrison is a rock evangelist." And I thought, what a great way of phrasing it.
Where'd that come from?
Exactly. And I thought, yeah, it's what a great way of phrasing it. Anyway, this album came out with brilliant original compositions. There are two covers on the album. One of them is a cover of an old blues standard, Backdoor Man. And then the other cover is a song from a 1927 German opera by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. So you have a band that not only has this incredible original material, but they can credibly cover a blues standard and then go to something from 1927 Wehrmacht Germany, or Weimar Germany rather. So, just a great range there. I think the Doors took music to places it had never been before. I read one review where they said that the folk rock stuff of LA was LA by the day, the Doors were LA at night. Just a second, let me flip over on my notes. Okay. This album was recorded in less than 1 month. It was accomplished with 4-track recording. So they had 1 track for guitar and organ, 1 track for drums, and 1 track for Morrison's vocals. The 4th track was reserved for overdubbing, of which they really did very little. They overdubbed some bass stuff in there to kind of punch up Ray Manzarek's organ bass. And then the epic song on the album, The End, that was actually 2 separate recordings that they dubbed together to make it a completed song. And then I think the Light My Fire took 2 takes. So you're looking at very original organic music that required very little overdubbing. And they accomplished an incredible sound with very simplistic recording. I mean, 4 tracks, and that's what they did it with. Excuse me. As I mentioned earlier, you have the epic song on there of The End, which started out as a simple goodbye song to Morrison's girlfriend. And then it evolved into that Oedipal section that got so much notoriety, which was something way out there for 1967. Because even though we have the Summer of Love coming up and hippies and drugs and everything, the United States was still a very conservative place in 1967. But The End is a very complex song, yet at the same time has this universal imagery that it can become essentially whatever you need or want it to be. You can take the essence of The End and look at it as a breakup song or an end of your innocence, end of friendship, end of someone's life. I mean, it can be so much to whoever listens to it. And I love the universality of that song. So that's my number 1 pick. Like I say, it's one of my personal favorite albums, and I think that it deserves its place in rock history.
I muted myself there. Here, I'm back. Yeah, that was, this actually would have been one of my picks for favorite for a favorite debut album last week, but knowing Bob as long as I've known him, I knew that he was even more enamored of the Doors debut album than I was, so I just left that path open for him. I agree. It's a fantastic album. Very very consistent front to back. It's solid to great. I mean, there are no weak moments on this album, I don't think. It predates Sergeant Pepper's. It predates Jefferson Airplane. It predates, 1967 was a huge breakout year for rock music, especially the album form. And Sergeant Pepper's came along that summer, and and pretty much made it known that albums are now an art form and not just a collection of good songs. It's actually, but Jefferson Airplane had their debut that year. Jimi Hendrix had his debut that year. Canned Heat had their debut that year. There were a lot of things that broke through in 1967. The Doors was pretty much the first. What did you say it was in January when it was released?
January 4th, 67.
Yeah. So that pretty much started the train rolling.
Well,
as far as albums as an art form, right?
Right. Well, what's even more remarkable, this was actually recorded in 1966, and then Elektra sat on it for 4 or 5 months before it got released. And apparently,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and when I was doing my research, I don't know why, but apparently the Doors didn't want the album released and until the beginning of 67. Yeah, so this was done in 66 before any of the, before anybody was even thinking about psychedelia or any of those other things that came out in rock in 67. So it really predates all of those people.
Right.
So the Doors were there way before anybody else.
Right.
We just didn't know about them until January.
Right. Was this album your life's entry into the Doors?
No, actually, my entry into the Doors was L.A. Woman. And I was 17 when I first heard L.A. Woman. And I liked it, and I bought the album. But to be quite honest, I wasn't really mature enough to understand that album. I liked the music and everything, but I didn't really understand it. But I liked it enough that I circled back and picked up their debut album. And that blew me away. And I was at a point in my life when I'm moving from being a teenager, even though I was 17, so I'm still a teen, but teetering on adulthood, trying to figure out who I was, what I wanted to be, and all of those things. And I put their debut album on the turntable, and it just immediately blew me away. Break On Through, because I interpreted Break On Through as me transitioning into the person that I would ultimately become. And then the end, and we've kind of talked about this before, but the end captivated me so much because I had a very rocky relationship with my parents. And when Morrison got into that whole Oedipal section, that really spoke to me, because I dealt with a father who had emotional issues, who was sometimes very brutal to my mom and me. And I never knew, and I sat there with all of this suppressed rage against my parents, well, not my parents, my dad. And then I listened to the Oedipal section of that. And no, I never wanted to have sex with my mom. But when Morrison articulated,
Doesn't mind killing your father.
And I mean, when he talks about killing his father in there, again, I never wanted to kill my father, but that gave me an outlet for all of those suppressed rage and emotions over dealing with my dad. So that's where it's got its personal hook into me.
Yeah.
You know, and then like I say, it was, I always fancied myself a pseudo intellectual. You know, I became a reporter, and you know, I tried to be a writer and stuff. So delving into the lyrics in those songs, like I say, I went from listening to music that was just there as background noise to actually suddenly seeing music as literature. And I never was much of a poetry person. Okay. So this is probably the closest I ever got to appreciating poetry, was in the lyrics to their songs. And, you know, and the Doors did this incredible range. You could have light songs like Light My Fire. And, you know, if you look at the lyrics to Light My Fire, they're not necessarily complex, but it had such an incredible sound behind it. Then, you know, you go to that blues standard that they covered so well. Excuse me. Then you get into, you know, 20th Century Fox, which is just a fun rockin' song. It's great to listen to. Then we get into the complexity of The End and Break On Through and Moonlight Drive and so many of these other incredible songs that Morrison created. So
Moonlight Drive was on Strange Days, but yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, so I think that, you know, they can go from being a hard ass blues band, you know, to this very intellectual group where you're listening to Baroque influences. I mean, you know, you had Ray Manzarek, who appreciated classical music and Baroque. You had Robbie Krieger with his flamenco background, and John Densmore, who was really into jazz drumming. So they went beyond just 3-chord rock and roll, you know, to create a very unique sound that I don't think anyone has ever been able to duplicate.
Yeah, and just to give our viewers a reference, we the very first video we did for this channel we discussed was a discussion of this album. So go back and check that out to get some more details on what we had to say about it. And also, one of my first posts on the blog at Geezerology.com was a run through the Doors catalog. So check in that and check those out for more on that album. But also, one other thing I wanted to say about it before we moved on is that I keep my eye on these YouTube channels of these people who do first reactions. There are 3 or 4 of them that I find quite entertaining. I follow and subscribe to, and for whatever reason, I guess they're all watching each other, but for other reason, a group of these people tend to start going in the same direction about the same time, like a school of fish, you know. But right now, the Doors debut album is going around among among some of these people. The vessel, my favorite is a guy just JP is the guy. He's a guy actually up in Central Florida who does about 7 or 8 reaction videos a week. And he'll pick an album and he'll go through each song of the album consecutively, but not all in a row. One week he'll do the first one week and then come back next week and do another one. He's about I think he's about halfway through side 2. He hasn't gotten to the end yet, but he's covered all of side 1 and Backdoor Man, I think is what he's got there. But go check that out. Just JP. It's entertaining. It's entertaining. If you're a fan of this album, you'll get a kick out of this. So I'm giving you a plug, JP, just to let you know.
I'd like to add one last thing real quickly.
Sure.
So the Doors got together in '65 after a chance encounter between Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek on the beach. Now, Manzarek, Krieger, and Densmore were all musicians already. Mm-hmm. So they came from a musical background. Jim Morrison, as far as I know, had no musical background. He was a poet and a film school graduate.
Right.
So from '65 and up until '66, you've got a guy being the front man of a band who has no music background.
Mhm.
So to go from nothing to how accomplished he became in essentially a year, I think is pretty phenomenal. You know, and we've all heard the story about when they were first playing clubs, Morrison had so much stage fright that he sang with his back to the audience. But then he evolved into one of the greatest showmen, I think, in rock history, which led, you know, my wife to make the rock evangelist comment. So I think it's pretty remarkable to go from nothing to being that accomplished a singer in essentially a year's time.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, but in hindsight, looking to see what happened, maybe we can also sit here and make the argument that it was too damn fast for his own
For his own good.
good.
Yeah, he definitely was one of those people who had trouble with
I
fame.
mean, he was a shooting star, man. He was here. He's a bright light in the sky, and then all of a sudden, poof, he was gone.
Of course, you know, Neil Young says it's better to burn out than it is to rust.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
All right,
Bob,
you
what's
ready?
next?
All righty. Number 2, Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experience?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Also released in 1967. So a little bit of background.
What month, do you know?
I'll
look at August, okay.
August of 67 in the
about
US.
about a month after Sergeant Pepper's, okay.
Yes. But it got released in the United Kingdom in May of 67. So it actually predates Sergeant Pepper's. Okay. Yeah, because Hendrix's initial fame was in England, not the US.
All
right. So anyway, in 1966, Hendrix was struggling to make a living as a backup guitarist on the rhythm and blues circuit. And he's playing in a club in New York. And Linda Keith, who is Keith Richards' girlfriend from the Rolling Stones, sees Hendrix perform. And she's captivated by him and starts introducing him to people in England. And eventually she introduces him to Chandler, who's with the Animals. And Chandler was leaving the Animals because he wanted to go into production and management. So he takes on Hendrix. They bring Hendrix to England and ultimately get him a recording contract with a new album company formed by the two men who managed The Who. So over a period of about 5 months, they start recording Are You Experienced in England. And the album is released in May of 67 in England, where it spent 33 weeks on the charts and it peaked at number 2. It was released in the United States through Reprise Records in August 23rd of 1967. And it went to number 5 on the album charts in the US, and it remained on the charts for 106 weeks, 27 of those in the top 40. It sold 1 million copies within 7 months of its release. Rolling Stone has put the album at number 30 on its 2020 list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. 4 of the songs from the album, Purple Haze, Hey Joe, Wind Cries Mary, and Foxy Lady, are also on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. So right from there, you can see the impact this album had. Interestingly, Hendrix got his break in the US by appearing at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967. And he got on the set list at Monterey because Paul McCartney demanded that Hendrix be added to the list. And McCartney ultimately said, I'll be on your board of directors if you put Hendrix on the bill. And his exposure from Monterey led Reprise to release the album in the US. And when they released it, they gave it a $20,000 promotional budget, which today doesn't sound like much, but that was a pretty big chunk of money in 67. And according to the research I've done, it was an unheard of amount of money spent on an unknown artist at the time.
Now, somebody had the great foresight to film that. So there was a film of it, and it was a very, very, very dynamic performance. That was the one where he covered his guitar in lighter fluid and set it on fire.
And in fact, there was the legacy has it that there was a big fight with the Who because they didn't follow Hendrix. So,
Oh yeah. I have heard that. I have heard that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, that gave Hendrix his big break in the U.S.
And the other thing is too, because of you know, Townsend's big thing at the time was destroying his equipment at the end of the show, and he kind of and then Hendrix going on before him not only you know not only put on this hell of a musical performance, but he also sort of jumped in on Townsend's visual act.
You know, I still remember the video footage, the film footage of Hendrix lighting that guitar on fire.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I was kind of like, well, in some ways it's a stunt, but I still remember the flames on the guitar, and then Hendrix sitting here with his fingers like rising the flames up, and it's like, damn, this is almost demonic.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Robert Johnson thing. Did you sell your soul to the devil for this talent? Anyway, I picked this album because I think Hendrix is an incredibly unique performer. Nobody else sounds like Hendrix. And, you know, of course, he's acclaimed as a guitarist, and you can be a musician and be influenced by other musicians without being a clone or copying them. If you're influenced by Hendrix and you sound like Hendrix, it's so obvious you're copying him because nobody else does what Hendrix did. And I know Robin Trower has suffered.
I was thinking of Trower. I remember that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, because he got accused of copying Hendrix.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, it's like he's so unique that he is out there totally by himself. But you know, he took that unique sound and he built on a base of rhythm and blues and free type jazz expression, you know, and then incorporated in those unique rock guitar licks. You know, I think Hendrix deserves credit for defining psychedelic music. You know, I mean, Purple Haze has got to be the banner song, you know, for that whole genre. Excuse me. And of course, you know, Hendrix's dynamic performance at Woodstock, where he did his version of the Star Spangled Banner. And ironically, Hendrix was supposed to close out Woodstock. So here you go from within 2 years' time, he's going from unknown to closing out one of the biggest rock festivals ever in the history of the country. But ironically, the show had run so far behind schedule that by the time Hendrix took the stage, most of the concert crowd had left.
Yeah, it was
So
like,
he only played
4 a.m. on Monday.
Yes. So
Something
he's got like
that.
about 40,000 people listening
Uh-huh.
to what is credited with one of the best performances at Woodstock.
Yeah.
So that was kind of ironic there.
But it's still still a lot of people did see that performance though, because
Yes, they did.
It was the climax, not the climax, but it was the
So if you were one
it
of the
was
people
on a
who,
Woodstock movie. It was
so if you were one of the people who braved 3 days of rain and mud, you got to see something incredible.
yeah.
So there are 11 songs on the US version of this album, all but one of them written by Hendrix. The only cover he did was Hey Joe, which is a classic blues song. And his cover of Hey Joe has become the definitive version of that song, just like his cover of Dylan's All Along the Watchtower is now the definitive version. In fact, Dylan has even said he likes Hendrix's version better than his own. I think the songs on the album prove Hendrix's talent, you know, as a writer. And, you know, while he's renowned mostly as a guitarist, if you listen to The Wind Cries Mary, you can hear that the guy's got some good vocal chops in there too when you know. So I think that it deserves recognition as a debut album for how incredibly unique his sound was, and that nobody else has been able to, well, nobody else can duplicate it without, you know, obviously being a clone. So,
He was very underrated as a singer. I was.
yes.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for the Are You Experienced album, and there's actually a different cover in the UK. I never knew this. The one you've been seeing down there for the last few minutes is the US version, but right about now, you're going to see the UK cover.
Yeah, they were quite different. The two albums had different songs on them. So yeah, there's I've never heard the
really?
UK.
The track listing was different too.
Yeah, the track listing was different.
Any idea of what the idea was behind that?
No, I don't. To be honest, quite honest with you, until I started doing the research on the album, I didn't know there was that. I knew that he started out first in the United Kingdom, but I did not know that there was that big a difference between the two album releases.
I'll see if I can find a real quick answer to that at some point and drop it in the drop it down there if I can find it. So it's not important, but I just like to. I'm just curious as to why, what if there was a marketing decision behind that, or what that was all about.
Yeah, but I know that in United Kingdom, he was on Track Records, which I say was a company founded by the two men who were the managers of the Who, and then in the U.S., he was on Reprise Records. So I don't know why the difference between the two.
I'm just looking at this on the UK version, the track listing. It's very, very different. It's not even the same album.
Yeah, which you have the same thing happened with
tracks that are common, but that's kind of weird. It looks like some of the tracks from the UK version landed on the follow-up album, Axis Bold as Love. Yeah, I never knew any of that.
I did not know it either, and like I say, I did not know there was that big a difference between the UK release and what came in the US.
Do you know who Hendrix famous? Do you know who Hendrix's favorite guitarist was?
Well, I know one of his supposed favorite guitarists, and that was a guy named Phil Keaggy. Do you think he was somebody different?
That's not who I was thinking of. No. He said that his favorite guitarist was Terry Kath of Chicago.
Oh, really? I had not heard that before.
Yeah.
Phil Keaggy is a guitarist in the Christian rock realm, and Hendrix gave a shout out to him one time.
I had friends who were huge Hendrix fans, and I've always liked him. I've owned all three of his studio. He only recorded 3 studio albums before his passing. He was in the middle of recording the 4th one.
Then about 75,000 posthumous releases.
Yeah. A lot of live things, a lot of studio outtakes, and then the stuff he was working on when he died. He was working on an album when he died, and that became. They pulled those tracks and they restructured it as something called Rainbow Bridge, which is supposedly the soundtrack of a movie, but the movie Rainbow Bridge didn't have any of these songs on the soundtrack. So that was just some kind of weird little marketing thing. But I've always been more of an appreciator of Hendrix than I have been a fan. There's some of his stuff that I find, that I really, really do love, but I never really got into him like really deeply.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. He's got some stuff that I really, really, really love, but he's not one of my
your go-tos. Yeah,
exactly. But I felt that I needed to recognize where he stands in the history of rock.
Oh yeah, huge history. Like I say, I've been a huge admirer of him more than a fan over the years.
All right, ready for number 3?
Number 3.
Okay, so it is 1976. Disco rules the world. Music bands are actually having trouble finding gigs because so many nightclubs are switching to playing recorded dance music rather than live music. So in the midst of that comes a guitar-driven rock album that sets sales records, becoming one of the best-selling debut albums up to that period. And that is Boston's self-titled release. This became a monster album in '76. It was certified gold 2 months after it was released, and it sold another 500,000 copies within the next 30 days. It went platinum in November of '76. By January of '77, they had sold 2 million copies, making it the fastest selling debut album up to that point. It was eclipsed in debut sales by Guns N' Roses' Appetite for the Disaster. It's now certified platinum 17 times over. There are 11 songs on this album, and nearly all of them are still in rotation on classic rock radio stations. Boston created what they call the Boston sound, and that sound has these giant melodic hooks, classically inspired guitar parts that alternate between acoustic and electric guitars. The inspiration behind it is classical music where the listener is set up for these dramatic changes in the music. And if you listen to classical, and I'm not a big classical fan, but you'll go from quiet sound suddenly to this bombastic, huge change. And so you go these highs and lows if you listen to classical music. And the driving force behind Boston was a classically trained pianist named Tom Scholz. And he, like I say, he's the mastermind behind Boston's sound. He wrote or co-wrote most of the songs on the album. And he's literally, quite honestly, probably genius status. Scholz has a master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT, and he worked in research and development at Polaroid while doing music on the side. And he'd be at Polaroid during the day and then go out, and play clubs and stuff at night. There's a really interesting, fascinating story behind the making of this album that I feel it's important to share. And Scholz lived in an apartment building, and he built a home recording studio in the basement of where he lived. And he also developed, as a mechanical engineer, he developed various analog electronic effects that he used in his recording. And he went on to found a company called Scholz Research and Development to market these devices. Anyway, the band had put together a demo tape, and they sent it out to various record companies, and company after company passed on it. And then Epic Records finally bit and gave them a contract. And Epic wanted the band to record at a studio in California. Scholz, however, wanted to record in his own home studio. So they did this elaborate ruse on the record company, and their co-producer and manager convinced the record company that they were actually out in California, but instead they're recording in the basement of Scholz's apartment. And they went out to California and recorded one track at the studio there to make the record company think that's what they were doing. So the story is that they're recording in this little basement studio in a pine paneled basement next to a furnace. And the area was so small that Scholz says that if they wanted to record organ parts, they had to dismantle the drum set to move the organ in to record it. And like I say, they're doing this in the basement of his home. When they finished the recording, they brought in a remote truck. They snaked a cable into the basement window, and they transferred everything onto this 24-track recording, in this mobile truck. And that's what they delivered to the record company. Scholz was responsible for the sound. On the album, he's credited with electric and acoustic guitars, clavinet, organ, bass guitar. He's credited as a design consultant he did remastering, did the liner notes, did production, and did engineering. And he says that the acoustic guitar parts of the album that he did he did all of that on a $100 Yamaha acoustic guitar. So, it's the old saying, it's not, it's not the wand, it's the magician behind it. So anyway, I think Boston deserves credit for that accomplishment, the sales that they had, for their lasting appeal, and for them reviving guitar rock music in the era of disco, when that was a genre that had really kind of fallen out of favor. So that's why I picked them for their debut album. I think it's a nod to what they accomplished, and those incredible sales records and stuff, especially, like I say, at the time when people were already saying, rock is dead, and we had disco dominated, we had punk and new wave that was coming up and all of that. So I think that's why I picked why I picked Boston, is a nod to what they accomplished, and again, a sound that no one else has really been able to duplicate. And not only do they have the heavy guitar work, but they mixed in all of those elements that comes from classical and some of the other influences.
I remember when this came out, it was huge.
Yes.
The record was huge. Of course, I was listening to FM radio at the time. I wasn't listening to Top 40, so I knew the Top 40 was being dominated by the discos and singer-songwriters and things at this time. But yeah, the rock wasn't dead. I remember hearing people say that, but yeah, that's just because we hadn't gotten in tune yet at that point with FM alternative radio. The media and the people who make these kind of pronouncements were still looking at the top 40 charts.
Well, I think unfortunately that was the era when you began to see so much consolidation of radio stations.
Yeah, there was consolidation of radio. I mean, the music industry at this time was becoming a corporate thing. There was a lot less. There was a lot of pullback on taking chances and experimentation. So he came up with a formula that everybody got on board with. I remember. What was the singer's name?
Brad Delp.
Brad Delp. He just died recently, didn't he?
No, it was back.
Has it been a while?
Sometime in the 2010s, I think.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe earlier than that.
Well, when you get to when you get to the end of the age group I have, anytime within the last 20 years is just recently.
Yeah, and in fact, Delp died, and then they found a guy who sounded remarkably like Delp, and they brought him into the band to continue. And in fact, I believe there was a throwaway movie called Rockstar, I think, and it has the plot of the movie has this heavy metal band that finally breaks up with their lead singer, and they find this guy who's in a cover band, and they suddenly make him, now their front man. And I think the plot for the movie was inspired by what Boston did in replacing their lead singer.
Yeah. Well, I know that their final studio album, or not the final, but the most recent studio album, which has been a while. Let me see if I can dig that up here. But they had a few tracks recorded. Scholz and Delp are the only two members of Boston through the years. I remember reading that they were the only two that were under contract to, I think it was Epic Records, a record company. They were the only two under contract to Epic as Boston, and everybody else, they just had touring musicians and pulled in some studio help. Life, Love, and Hope in 2013, which was the first Boston album in 11 years. Life, Love, and Hope. Yeah, there was a few. Scholz had a few tracks recorded with Delp when he died, and then he ended up filling up the album with a couple of other singers, I believe. I think it was more than one. I think there was 2 or 3 others. Delp sang on like half of the tracks, and a guy named Gary Pill and somebody named Kimberly Downey, somebody named Tommy DiCarlo. So there were 3 others. And it basically was just Scholz just kind of grabbing anybody who he could grab to sing a song. And it turned out that the album did not get very good reviews because it was just so.
Oh, yeah. But I bought their debut album and I bought the follow-up, but after that, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to Boston anymore. I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't feel that they captured.
I get the sense. I never followed them closely, but as far as I remember, that this debut album was just freaking huge. There was a second album. They did a follow-up. Yeah, Don't Look Back, which actually was a big hit too, but it was basically, as I recall, just basically a sequel. It was, it was just, well, that worked so well, let's do it again. But I think Don't Look Back was actually the title track of that second album, was actually their biggest hit. And 1, 2, 3, 4, Boston only recorded 4 albums after that. Boston, the debut 76, Don't Look Back 78. Then they jump forward to 1986, jump forward to 1994, and then 2002, and then 2013. So yeah, not a prolific band.
Not necessarily, and like after the second album,
but certainly an influential one in that period, because there were a lot of people started doing what they did.
I lost interest after their second album, and I still like the first album.
It took them 8 years to come up with a third.
So it may be a deal of they had their great debut and couldn't necessarily duplicate that success again. Yeah, but I still give them credit for
one great idea, but you can only go so far with that one great idea.
Right. But I
start coming up with other ideas that you never did.
But I still felt they deserved recognition, for what they did. And if we're talking about debut albums, I think it deserves its recognition, for what they accomplished, especially the way in which they did it, which was, a really unique backstory. But I think Boston is actually the genius of one person, and everybody else was there to do what he needed to do.
Yeah. Brad Delp, the other member of Boston, was there because he couldn't sing, right?
Yeah, and the story about Delp, he had actually quit the band because they were a bar club band in the Boston area, and Delp actually quit because they couldn't make a living at it, and he had he went back to his day job. And when they finally got a recording contract, Scholz called him, and Delp's like, "Hey man, I gotta make a living," and Scholz said, "Well, would you at least just come and sing for the album? And if you don't want to stay after that, if it doesn't do anything, fine." And apparently nobody thought that they were going to be the success that they were. So Delp says, "Okay, fine, I'll come over and I'll record the album." Well, then it got released and suddenly it's selling like crazy. So, Delp quit his day job.
Yeah, I'm just looking here real quick. He died, by the way, in 2007. Okay, Bob, let's that was 3 good debut albums. So we've had 6 of them the past week. I think we could probably get another couple of episodes out of debut albums. I still have several of them that I'd like to talk about. So maybe we'll revisit this topic here in the next couple of months.
I think we need to, because it was tough winnowing it down to 3.
Yeah, I wasn't winnowing down. I was just trying to pick 3, 3. But I certainly, if we would have done the top 10, I could have easily come up with a top 10 list. So,
and
so we'll do this one again.
And just to highlight diversity, I tried going a little bit different direction than you went. So,
okay, anything you want to say in closing?
I think I'm good, man.
Okay, visit us at Geezerology.com. We have a lot of good stuff there, and we will continue to have good stuff there. Come on back next week. We haven't made a decision yet on what we're going to talk about next week, but we'll have something for you next Sunday. Geezerology on YouTube. Please subscribe to us. Go look at all of our videos. I think this is our 14th one now, one a week. So we've been doing this for what, 3.5 months?
We had that kind of staying power.
Yeah. So anyway, visit us next week on YouTube. Visit us at Geezerology.com to read our blog. And thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good week. So long.
Thanks. Thank you.